Greetings, welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, and this is going to be the second edition of the Introduction to Wood Carving series. This edition we're going to be talking about sharpening our tools. As I mentioned when I was going over tools, I have yet to purchase a tool that was sharp enough new out of the box. Okay? They will come sharp, they will definitely cut you, they will definitely be sharper than a kitchen knife, but they won't be quite sharp enough for wood carving. You need extremely keen edges to do this well and safely. If your edge is not adequately sharp, you will crush the fibers of the wood and get a poor finish. And you will also simultaneously have to apply more force to do that, which means that you will more frequently be splitting pieces off of your workpiece and needing band-aids. Okay? So when you feel like you're forcing, it's time to sharpen. Every tool I get or buy or make, I sharpen immediately before I do anything with it, even try it out. And about every half hour or so of carving, you will need to hone your tools. That will vary a little bit depending on what wood you're doing. If you're doing something that is extremely hard, you will of course blunt your edge faster. If you are working with balsa wood for whatever reason, you will last longer than 30 minutes before you have to sharpen. The worst woods around here in terms of blunting tools are the Caria genus, your hickories and pecans, because they have what are called phytoliths, which are little silica structures embedded in the cell wall of the plant cells. Okay? So, and they're not the only species that do that, but they're the ones that are common and notable in North American woodworking. So if you're dealing with one of those, you're going to be sharpening tools a lot. So they don't come up as much in simple carving, more in carpentry and joinery work, but they're wonderful woods. They're wonderful woods. So that guideline of every half hour will vary. You will get a feel for it. You'll know when it's cutting cleanly and leaving a nice burnished finish. You'll see when you start to crush the plant cells and need to sharpen, and you'll feel when it's taking more and more force to do the same job. Okay? Also, if you're working in a laminated piece with glue lines, glue is harder than wood. That will blunt your edge faster. So, as a rule of thumb, if you ever find yourself asking the question, should I take one more cut or should I just go sharpen the blade? The answer is always put down your piece and go sharpen the blade. My wife behind the camera is snickering at me because she knows anytime I don't listen to that little voice in my head, I end up, honey, I need a Band-Aid.
You aren't wrong.
Yeah. So, you need to get good at sharpening tools, and you need the resources with which to sharpen your tools. Okay? Before we talk about the stones and the sandpaper and those sorts of things, I want to talk about what your edge actually is. So, when you pick up, this probably is a little too small to pick up on camera, but you have the flat of the steel here, the original blank, and then it tapers off into a bevel. Okay? The more acute that bevel, the sharper it is. The more obtuse that bevel, the less sharp it is. Okay? And the bevel angle that you want is a compromise between sharpness and durability. Okay? Any material can be made equally sharp, but that doesn't mean that all edges with, say, we'll just pick an arbitrary number, 10 degrees will work equally well. Okay? So as you go to softer materials, you have to have a more obtuse edge. Okay? As you go to harder materials, you can, because they will mush, right? If you have a really acute edge on a copper blade, okay, it's going to mush down. Yes, you can get it as sharp as a steel blade, but it doesn't matter because as soon as you touch work with it, it will mush down, and you go from this to this the first time you touch your material, and now it doesn't cut anymore. So you have to start with a more obtuse bevel. The same thing is actually true at the other end of the spectrum, extremely hard materials, like flint. Flint you can get extraordinarily sharp on a fine edge, but those extraordinarily sharp, fine edges fracture because it is so hard and so brittle. They fracture off. Okay, so a flint flake, you can get one or two little cuts on a piece of wood, and then you need another flake because the edge just shatters immediately. So if you look archaeologically at 10,000-year-old native copper tools in North America and flint tools from the same time period, they have about the same edge angle. It's about 60 degrees. Also about the edge angle that we put on cold chisels, where you're using steel to cut metal, because here you need a more obtuse edge, not because you have an inferior material, but because you're cutting a harder piece of work. So again, you have to lean into the more obtuse angle. So everything is a compromise on that. And with carving tools, with the sort of carving and handwork that we're going to be talking about, we're assuming a blade which is on the harder end of the spectrum, and a material such as pine or basswood, we'll talk about materials more in the next video, that's on the softer end of the spectrum. So we're going to have a fairly acute angle, sometimes, such as on these, even down to about a 20-degree intersection, with each bevel being 10 degrees off of vertical. Okay? 30 degrees is pretty common. 45 is on the big side. You're not going to really see a 45-degree angle. Some chopping tools maybe, but not so much. So we're in that like 15 to 30 degree range with most of our tools. Okay? Now the simplest bevel, and the bevel that most of these tools will come with, is just a straight bevel. Okay? Two intersecting planes meet at a point. You can sharpen your tools, and you should sharpen your tools to have that straight bevel when you're honing them the first time. But as you go when you're shaping them for the first time, but as we go from shaping to honing, remember every half hour you hone. That doesn't mean every half hour you completely reshape the edge. We're just touching up the edge exactly where it meets the wood. Okay? When you're doing that, these edges will evolve into either a micro bevel type sharpening technique, or if you're using a soft strop, we'll talk about that here in a minute as well, you will evolve toward an apple seed edge. So what are these? Well, if you think of, we'll talk about micro bevel first. This is the technique that I use. If you think about this as your initial edge, if you touch up the edge on a hard stone, okay, a hard polishing stone, which is what I use. This is the Japanese technique. It's razor. A lot of razors were sharpened this way. You're just touching up the edge, and every time you do that, it's going to lean over just a tiny bit more. We call that the micro bevel. Eventually, the micro bevel has been left sufficiently obtuse that it's no longer capable of becoming as sharp as you would prefer. At which point, you go to a medium stone, and you reform that true even bevel, and then you do it again. Okay? So that's sharpening with a micro bevel. If you use, and this is my polishing stone, it is simply the same polishing medium you would put on a leather strop, but with a hard binder in it. So it's a rigid material. If you take the polishing medium that's in this, and you get it in a tube, and you take a piece of belt leather, and if you're buying leather to make your own strop, it's very easy to do. Go to a used clothing store, get a belt that is vegetable tan, just hard belt leather. Okay? You want, if you're reading labels, the top grade of leather is called top grain. Okay? So you want a good top grain leather, get a cheap used belt, cut it into sections, glue it to a piece of wood, put some polishing compound on it, and you have a home. Okay? And then buy some polishing medium, put it on there, and then you can hone your edge on that, the same way I will show honing the edge on the polishing stone. Because that surface has give, it will evolve into an apple seed edge. So you start with your straight bevel, okay? And then as you hone it, it's going to evolve into a curved surface. Again, every time you remove metal, becoming a little bit more obtuse. Eventually, again, you need to go back to a hard medium stone and reform your straight bevel. Okay? You aren't going to need to do that very often. If you're a casual, occasional carver, doing that is a once every couple of months chore, and it's only going to be a 10-minute chore. Okay? This is not a fast process when we're just using polishing stones. So, appleseed edge is the third kind of edge. Now, some tools we will deliberately put an appleseed edge on right from the get-go, and those are your chopping tools for coarse work. A hatchet, an axe, those sorts of tools I will always put an appleseed edge on. The advantage is you still get a fairly acute tip right at the end, but if you look at this form, you have an initial edge here, which is fairly acute, and then there's a lot of support just a little ways away from it. Okay. Also, when you're doing a chopping tool, like an axe or a hatchet, it won't jam up in the cut. So when you're cutting into the wood grain, you're spreading it, but it hasn't split free yet, and it's putting back pressure on that tool. An appleseed edge won't stick as badly as a straight bevel axe would. Okay? So there we want to put an appleseed edge. Anytime you're going to do chopping chores, you want an appleseed edge. Carving tools, we're looking at shaving, so you want a straight bevel. Okay? The edge that you will see commonly on kitchen knives and some high-end hunting knives that I really don't like for a carving tool is what's called a hollow grind, which is just literally the opposite of the appleseed edge. Okay? That's a hollow grind profile. It gives you a very acute edge, but that edge is not robust and is prone to chipping. So it dulls very, very quickly when you're cutting wood with it. It's great if you're slicing tuna. It is not so great if you're slicing maple. Okay? So I am not a fan of hollow grind edges on carving tools. Now, I'm sure, yes, somebody out there has a hollow ground tool that they just love. You're allowed to love your tool. I'm not being, trying to be critical of your personal preferences. Try stuff out, see what you like. If you enjoy using something, keep using it, okay? I'm giving my personal preferences. There are certainly people that have an axe that has a straight bevel that they love. Broad axes, definitely, I would sharpen with a straight bevel, but that's a specialty tool. An adze blade, I would sharpen with a straight bevel. But a generally used chopping axe, I would do an appleseed edge. So those are my preferences. There are other people with other preferences. Theirs are just as legitimate as mine. I'm sharing, I'm not denigrating. So, okay. That's understanding our basic geometries. Next, we want to talk about sharpening tools. You have three basic categories. You have strops, which I don't use. Perfectly good. Many people love them. Okay, if I was doing a lot of curved tools and gouges, I would absolutely add a strop to my repertoire. I don't use a lot of curved tools, so I just haven't made one. I haven't had a position where I thought, okay, I need a strop now. Easy to make. I probably will make one eventually here, but for now I use the stones. Stones come in natural pieces of sandstone or slate that are mined. Okay, your traditional Japanese water stones, the old-fashioned ones, are all mined stones. Arkansas stone is a mined stone. Belgian hone is a Belgian garnet hones are a natural stone. Razor strops, razor slates were a natural slate. What the natural stones have in common is they will be a soft sandstone with an even grit. Okay? So if you find a piece of soft sandstone with an even grit, you have found a sharpening stone. Okay? I have a whole pile of them. I went to a countertop place and bought a whole bunch of their chips at one point. I haven't finished them all and gotten them all ready, but many of those I've used and have made wonderful stones. So that's an inexpensive way that you can build a collection. They won't all work equally well. You do want to make sure that they have even grit, or you'll leave deep gouges in your material if you have the occasional large piece. Okay? So you do want to make sure if you're using a found sandstone that it has an even grit. But humans, for 10,000 years, Native Americans have been using copper. It is the oldest metallurgical technology on the planet, and they were sharpened on found sandstone, right? Look around at old farmsteads. It's not uncommon to find somewhere by the front door a chunk of whatever the local sandstone is with a gully carved in it from people honing their axes. Okay, so feel free to do that. You can also buy some natural stones. Synthetic stones are a grit and a binder. Okay, the nature of the binder determines whether it's to be used with water or oil. So synthetic stones, natural stones you can use with either water or oil as the lubricant. You do need a lubricant, okay? But either is really okay with a natural stone. Synthetic stones have a binder that's compatible with oil or a binder that's compatible with water. Some oil stones you can also use with water without damaging them. Water stones that are sold as water stones, which are my personal preference, really don't like oil. Okay. Once you've used a stone with oil, you can then not use it with water because it won't be able to soak up. When you're using an oil stone, you can just squirt a little oil on it. Water stones, you need to pre-soak a little bit. I like water stones simply because of mess and cleanup. It's very easy. I just keep a paper towel by me and wipe up whatever I need to wipe up. That's why I like water stones. Also, I always keep these in the house. Water stones don't like to freeze because the water can crystallize and spall out the edges of your stone. Okay? So a wet water stone needs to be above freezing. Of course, if you dry them out well, then it doesn't matter again. But if you're actively using it, it's going to remain wet, and they can fracture if they freeze. Oil stones won't do that. So if you have an occasional use shop that's outdoors, that's not going to be maintained above freezing all year, you might want to look at the oil stone option instead of the water stone option. Okay? The third option is you can go to in stones, or things called stones, is a diamond stone or a ceramic stone, which just has a surface where the surface is so hard it will not wear down. Okay, so they don't wear away; they stay dead flat. Well, a lot of folks like them because of that; they stay dead flat. A lot of them are advertised as not needing a lubricant. I find that they glaze if you don't use a lubricant. That's been my experience. I haven't used every brand. I'm sure out there's some brand that does work well without a lubricant, but I prefer to use a lubricant with those. I haven't used a lot of them. I've used some ceramic slipstones, and I just use them with water as a lubricant. Again, you can use them with oil as a lubricant. And those are cleanable, so you could take some dish soap, wash off the oil, and then use it as water lubricant. So they have that advantage. Those are the stones. If you need a grit of stone that you don't have, or you're just getting started, you don't want to invest a lot in a set of good stones, you can make yourself a sharpening surface by taking a piece of sandpaper and gluing it to something flat. Okay? This is 220 grit sandpaper, and I like to do it this way when I'm using a tool, when I'm doing something which is likely to gouge up one of my good stones. Okay? This is a little triangular scribe that I'm in the process of making. It will have a handle about that much will stick out. Okay. And when I'm doing course shaping or any kind of coursework on something that is likely to have a lot of corners like this, a lot of fairly obtuse, sturdy corners that would be likely to gouge in and make holes in one of my good, expensive stones, I do this because I don't care nearly as much if I rip a piece of sandpaper as if I dig a chunk out of one of my expensive stones. And then you can just throw a little bit of water and go to town on that and shape your tool. Okay. This is not yet. This one is not yet hardened, and this is still initial shaping. Okay. You do want to get good sandpaper if you're going to do this. This piece glued to this is Rhino Wet brand sandpaper. I got this from Alex Steele's company. Got a big pack of it. Very nice sandpaper. If you want to find something locally, you're probably going to have better luck finding some of this cloth-backed emery cloth paper. This stuff is made for metalwork. Okay, this is good sandpaper. This, I do a lot of woodwork sanding with this stuff as well. Do not buy any type of sandpaper which is not labeled wet dry, because you do need water to lubricate it or it will glaze almost immediately. And do not buy cheap sandpaper. Cheap sandpaper, 3 or 4 strokes with a metal tool, and you have scraped all of the grit off. Okay? Cheap sandpaper is not worth free. It is trash. Okay? Do not buy cheap sandpaper. You will hate life. You will be miserable. You will say, why did this guy give me all this nonsense about sharpening tools and sandpaper? Okay? You have to buy good sandpaper that is made for metal work. Okay? You just go to a hole-in-the-wall hardware store and buy 80 cents a sheet sandpaper, glue it to a board, throw some water in it, 3 or 4 strokes. You're like, where'd all my sand go? You're gonna have a bad time. Okay? So just remember that. Cheap sandpaper is not worth free, let alone the 80 cents it costs. Spend $2 or $3 a sheet on good sandpaper. You're not going to break the bank. We're still talking about a piece of sandpaper here, not gold. Okay? So buy good sandpaper. Now, when you're looking at a blade, if you bought a blade, it's new out of the package, you want to see how good it is, or it's not cutting the way you think it should, and you want to see what's going on. The first thing you want to do is look right at the edge. Okay? You should not be able to see the edge. Okay, it should be that fine. If you can see any light glinting off of it, it means there's a roll or a wire edge. Or, remember I said if you're doing a micro bevel sharpening, eventually that will get flat enough that you can start to see light glint off it. When that happens, it's time to reshape. Okay? So what you want to do when you're reshaping is you want to take, and I just completely did this one yesterday, so I don't want to mess it up again. So I'm going to only touch it on the finer stone here, because that's fine. I can needlessly polish my polished surface and won't mess anything up on that. When you're reshaping, you want to go to a medium stone. This is about 1,000 grit here, 800 or 1,000. I forget exactly which. That's a nice medium. For buying your first stone, if you want to do this with stones only, go and you can get these from woodworking supply catalogs. You can get these from kitchen supply catalogs. There's a bunch of brands and they're all good. I really don't care what brand of stone you get. But get one that's a 2-sided stone, something in the order of 800 grit on one side and something on the order of 1,200 grit on the other side. If you're buying only one and you're only going to be using tools which are already pretty darn close to good, get 1,000 grit. Compromise. You can go from 1,000 grit right to polishing, and you're not going to hate life because of it. Okay? If you're buying yard sale tools that need major reforming, now you need a half dozen grits, because you're going to need to drop down to something on the order of at least 150. Okay, 100 or 150, 60 or 80 would be better to get the really bad nicks out of it, or if you have a really bad nick in it. This one has a really bad nick in it. This is a chisel that I needed to use for a construction project, and sure enough hit a nail. Okay. So this is a really bad nick in it. I'm going to need to take this to at least 150 grit and then work my way back up before I'm really talking about sharpening. So shaping and sharpening are different. Now, if you only do that once in a while, you can go the sandpaper route. You don't need to buy a $40 stone in each of those grits. Okay? But if you are, but you do need to do that. When you're starting with something that's pretty close to good, you can do your initial shaping on the 800, quick take the scratches from the 800 out on the 1200, and then go to polishing here. This one just was polished about 12 hours ago, so I'm not going to use this stone, but the process is the same on every stone. What you want to do is you want to take the blade, put it down, and make sure your stone is well lubricated. This one is nice and covered with water. If it doesn't have enough, just put a little bit more on it. Okay? And now with one hand, hold the blade, and with the other hand, take your finger and touch it so that you can feel when that bevel is in full contact with the stone. Okay? The difference between doing this effectively and not really doing anything is half a degree of angle. Okay? So you need that to be right in contact with the stone. So touch it, feel it, get that, and kind of memorize that body position. And then just hold it and polish that bevel. Okay? Back and forth, and then work it out to the tip. Okay? And then back and forth. And once you've had a tool for a while, you won't need to touch it anymore. You'll just know where that angle is because you've done this enough times. Okay? So if you are doing this on a factory tool, you want to take it and see what the factory finish looks like. And then take it to your medium stone, your 800 grit, 600 grit, 800 grit, and work it on that stone until you have completely removed the factory finish. That tells you you're good. Okay? Then flip your stone over, assuming you have a two-sided stone, and do it on the 1200 grit until you've completely removed the surface from the 600. Okay? And then polish until it is completely shiny. Now, if you want to go strop, you don't need the stone. And a belt from the local thrift store plus a tube of compound is going to be cheaper than a polishing stone. These are usually on the order of $80 to $100 to buy a good polishing stone. And you can spend more than that if you want. A tube of grit, I don't even know what they are, but you're probably talking on the order of a dozen or a couple dozen dollars. Plus a piece of actual top grain leather belt. Now I say actual top grain leather belt because the grade, if you see something labeled genuine leather, that is a legal marketing term for leather scraps reconstituted with glue. Okay? Somebody thought that was a good idea, and it's a registered marketing term for reconstituted leather and glue. Okay? It will not make a good strop. So you're looking for the words top grain cowhide, really, to make a strop. But if you have an old leather belt, you know, I'm sure that if you're watching a wood carving video, you probably have enough experience that you can tell what a good, solid, old-fashioned leather belt feels like. You're just looking for that. Glue the grain side to your piece of wood, flesh side up, and then take a piece of sandpaper and kind of sand the fuzz off the back of the flesh side, and then smooth, smear some polishing compound on it. And then you have your polishing stone. So again, whether you're using stone like I am or a strop, polish the flats, polish the other flats, okay? And then when you're done with that, obviously it'll take you a little bit longer than I just did. It's time to hone. So when you're honing the edge, and this is where you get either the micro bevel starting to evolve or the apple seed edge starting to evolve. You touch it to your stone, find that angle, and then just pick it up a degree. Okay? So you're just touching the edge, and then in a smooth, even motion, drag it across the stone. Okay? And I usually do this twice on each side. Okay? Now, once you've done that, inspect your stone, your knife. Okay? Check it, look at the edge. See if you see any glinting. Okay, if you see any glinting, then hone it again where you saw the glinting. Okay, I actually did see a little bit of glinting on that one. Okay, then look at it again. The other, now it's gone. That once each side took away that little bit of glinting that I saw. Okay, now the other thing you want to check for is a wire edge. So a wire edge happens where you're putting pressure against a hard surface. You get a wire edge from stones. You won't get a wire edge as much from a strop. But what happens is if you have this straight edge and you put a lot of pressure here, the very little bit of that edge will bend over. Okay? And that's a wire edge. So if you get one of those, you want to sharpen it off. You don't want to just break it off. So kind of an old school way to do this, if you looked at somebody who learned woodworking in the 50s, you might have seen them go up to a leather strop and just go like that a bunch of times. What they're doing is they're work hardening and snapping off the wire edge. I don't recommend that. You want to hone it off with this proper motion, not snap it off. If you snap it off, instead of your nice acute edge meeting it at like a perfect angle, you're going to kind of have more of a bluntness there because it's going to snap off basically 90 degrees, 90 degrees to the edge parallel to the back of your blade. Okay? So you have this nice even bevel and then a flat top. Okay? It might be so narrow that you can't see it as glinting and you will still cut reasonably well, which is why people have done it for eons. But you're now going to have to hone it sooner because you took some of the life off of that edge. So you're making yourself work, even if you get a good edge that's cutting nicely, you're making yourself more work in the long run than just one or two extra passes on a stone. Sometimes you can see a wire edge as glinting, sometimes you can't. And you'd be amazed just how small a surface you can see by taking your thumb and dragging it across the blade. Now, notice I'm going from the spine toward the edge, right? I'm not coming into the edge. That would be bad, right? But you can often just do this and see if you feel it. Then see if you can see it. And if you can neither feel it nor see it, you're ready to carve. Okay? So that's the basics. Now, the last thing I want to talk about are these curve tools. So these have an inside curve that needs to be sharpened. The bevel is usually on the outside, okay? So you can take this and hone that outside bevel on a flat stone, just like I've been describing, okay? It's a little trickier, and it's a pain in the neck, okay? But you can hone the outside on these stones. I don't do much concave work in my own carving. So, and when I do, it's just like a little cleanup cut here or there. When I ever get to the point that I'm doing a lot of concave work, this is when I will definitely make a strop. Okay? Because I often get little gouges in my stones when I'm doing this. Also, this knife has a little bit of a hollow grind in it, which contributes to gouging up my stones a little bit, and that's part of my dislike for hollow grind, is this knife. But that doesn't leave, you can do the same thing here on a Makatogan, okay? That doesn't leave this inside surface polished. So we need a way to do that. You can purchase things called slipstones, which are small slivers of stone with and it's made out of the same stuff as your large bench stones. Small slivers with various curvatures and shapes for getting into these tools. Okay. Again, if you're going to do a lot of this, you'll need those. But when you're first getting started, and or are in a position like me where you don't do a lot of hollow work and you just only need to touch up these blades once in a long while because you're only making very occasional cuts, take a piece of sandpaper, roll it up. Okay? And then this will have enough give to conform to your edge and enough rigidity to effectively sand it. Okay? So when I'm doing the insides of these tools, I always do it with sandpaper because I just don't do it enough to justify purchasing $300 worth of slipstones in all of the different grits, because you need every shape in every grit. Okay? So that gets expensive. If I ever jump into a bunch of relief carving or find myself using, hook knives more than I currently do, I will add those as I need them. That's one of the principles in this, getting started in a new craft, is you add tools as you need to. Don't just go and purchase everything. And sandpaper will get you out of a lot of tight spots, in this case literally. Okay? So while you're learning, you can fudge it with sandpaper very effectively. For occasional tools that don't warrant the expense of getting this tool its own set of slipstones, sandpaper will do just as well, even if you're experienced. So there's my intro to sharpening. We'll see things like this again when I get into some more blacksmithing projects and talk about tool making. We will, of course, then talk about sharpening and shaping more than just sharpening. But these pointers will get you started. For most people, I would recommend a two-sided stone in your medium range and a cheap leather belt and a tube of polishing compound for your starter kit. Okay? And then again, as with everything, add to it as you grow. Okay? So I hope you found this useful and informative. I hope you're enjoying our young channel, and I hope that you will like, share this video, that you will subscribe, and that you will ring the bell for part 3 of this series, which will be on carving woods and selecting good wood for your project. Till then, have a wonderful day.